Hey y'all, this is Chu and Meng from Two Mom Boys,
What's up, everyone?
and today we'll be talking about domestic violence, and we'll be bringing on two guests today with us to talk about it. But before we start, we'll give everyone a chance to share or join in. So in the meantime, let's listen to some music.
All right, everyone.
All right. Hey.
Thanks again for joining us. This is Meng and Chu from Two Hmong Boys, and we did want to have this discussion today regarding domestic violence, just based on some of the events that happened last week around the Newly situation. We wanted to come on and have a discussion with some of our Hmong brothers on, what we just believe, everyday Hmong men. So guys like us, Chu, our brothers, everybody, and what we can do to help address the domestic violence within our Hmong community. So, we acknowledge and understand that domestic violence is an ongoing issue. But events like these serve as, really important reminders to us of the reality of that and the importance that we continue to address these each and every day so we can keep these issues front and center and drive the change that we need. And so, domestic violence is also a very complex topic, and we're by no means experts on this, in its entirety. But for today's discussion, what we want to focus specifically on, though, is what everyday men like us can do to try to change, be part of the solution and drive change. So we're happy to bring on two other Hmong brothers to engage in this conversation with us. And, as I mentioned, a goal of our conversation today is to just start this discussion amongst ourselves and our viewers and, encourage other Hmong men to do the same with your group of friends and family.
All right, with that, let's welcome on Daniel Lee and Yeng Lee. Hey guys.
What up, y'all?
So I just want to thank you for joining us today in this very important topic.
Yeah, and so before we kind of get into it, I thought we should probably maybe do a quick intro for the audience, and then let's maybe discuss kind of our journey and where we've been up to this point in time on why we feel kind of passionate or why we were looking to drive change when it comes to domestic violence. So maybe Yenghua, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, hey everybody, my name's Yeng Lee. As far as like the moment that I made me realize like this was kind of an issue was in my younger years, family members that have gone through domestic violence, witnessing it with other family members and things like that. It wasn't really until I started working with the Marjorie Mason Center. It's a really great nonprofit organization in Fresno. They deal a lot with survivors of domestic violence and, giving them shelter to have some place safe to stay. And it wasn't really until then that I truly realized the magnitude of, just how bad it is in the community in general, and especially in the Hmong community. Ever since then, I've always been kind of aware of it, and I think like most people have kind of just put it on the back burner. But I hope that with today's discussion we can put that in the forefront and move this forward.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Yenghua. Daniel, how about you?
Hello, everybody. I was like, oh, do I put my pageant voice on? Hi, my name is Daniel Lee. I have known about domestic violence ever since I was a little kid, because I remember going to my aunt and uncle's house when my parents were and I remember seeing like them about to get violent and my dad stepping in. So thankfully, my dad had taught me from a young age that we should never lay our hands on
one. Passionate or why we were looking to drive
on my parents. Yeah. Sorry, I heard a little bit of an echo. Yeah, so I'd always learned about that, but then it didn't come to a head until maybe 2015, 2016. I don't know if you guys know about the case of Chinawat Vu, who there's a Hmong man who killed his wife because she was having an affair, and then he attempted to commit suicide after the fact as well. And after having such a tragedy, I saw the comment of people saying, hey, it essentially like she deserved it, or this is why you shouldn't be a cheater. I'm like, I don't think anybody ever deserves to be murdered. So that's what started the journey of like, okay, we really have to be an advocate, because even in the way people are speaking about things like this, it's not okay.
Yeah.
makes it that much harder for a woman to speak up about her experience. So I'm really hoping that this conversation can address some of the questions that people have, and also get them to really think about themselves and be like, okay, what are the biases that I've learned along the way, and how can I break them?
Yeah, cool.
Right. Thanks, Daniel. So for me personally, to be honest, I haven't really dealt much with domestic violence in my life. Like I never seen my dad hit my mom, like even once. All my uncles, I never seen them hit their wives. They've always been so like they hardly ever argue, or at least in front of us. So but then with that, like I always thought like that was someone else's problem, or that didn't affect me. So and I always thought I was a good ally to women, but it turns out I wasn't, because when I got married and through countless arguments with my wife about gender roles and like just injustice to the women in our community, I finally realized that I'm not a good ally to Hmong women. And then with that, like it made me realize, wow, there's something wrong here. I need to do better. I need to step up. I need to learn more about it. And then it's kind of been a little passion of mine more recently to like help make a change in the community. But but to be honest, I don't really know how to. And I'm glad that we're doing this conversation to help each other learn more about it, and so that we can each help in our own way.
It's cool, Chu. Yeah, as far as for me, similar to Chu, I didn't really experience domestic violence in the household growing up. Like I never saw my dad hit my mom. And there was a moment when I was a kid where I do remember a lot of commotion coming from my grandparents' room, and my grandma coming out, and she was uneasy. I think she was crying, and then kind of nosy me went in there. I think my dad and my mom were there. My grandpa just kind of what's going on, and I think I found out that like my grandpa hit my mom or my grandma, but I didn't witness it, right? So. But also growing up, I was also very aware of, kind of the privilege or the favoritism that's displayed towards men. I could see the way, my sisters were treated as they were growing up, as they got married, kind of some of the patriarchy in our community, but just kind of really maybe like took it for what it was. Like, hey, this is just how things are in a sense. And it wasn't really until probably I had my daughter that acknowledgement of that turned into, actually that's a problem, because I didn't want her to grow up the same way my parents grew up. I didn't want her, or my mom grew up. I didn't want her to grow up the same way my sisters grew up. I wanted the community to view her differently, with more value and in different ways that we view my sisters and my mother and them. So that's when I started really like wanting to make change selfishly for my daughter, so that she could be respected as a woman in the ways that I want her to be respected as a woman. And the other piece that kind of the other moment that kind of helped me move there too is when I went through my divorce with my ex-wife, was also acknowledged and understood like all the stuff that she's going to go through as well. The way she's going to be viewed by the community, whether it's both of us that contribute to that. So just kind of wanting like not my daughter not to see her mother being treated in that way by the community as well was also another point for me to take into like, hey, like things need to change for women in general, so that everybody can be a little bit more equal footing grounds. So before we get into the first question, I just want to recap for those who are joining late. The focus of our conversation today is really to have a conversation just amongst like everyday men, normal men. We don't need to be experts in positions of power, et cetera, to make change and drive change in our community. But I think everybody has a role that they can play to help change our communities. And so maybe we'll hit on the first question here for you guys here is that, what do you guys think about change? Like, how do we go about making change and just kind of driving some of this change?
So before we talk about change, I want to bring up something first. Before you can actually bring about change, I think it's good to understand what the issues are. And like some of the issues that I see in our community is like Hmong men are in a position of privilege that they're either not aware of, or they're unwilling to acknowledge. And with that, if you're unwilling to acknowledge your privilege, you're unwilling to make a change. And I see that's one of the issues that I see, and how can we change that? And I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
Sure, I think that's a good point that you bring up. I think in order to change, the people in power, or the people that have the imbalance of power in their favor, they have to acknowledge their privilege. They have to acknowledge that some of these problems don't affect them as much as it affects maybe the other, in this particular instance, the other gender, right? You know, I think Hmong boys that grow into men, we grow up in a very patriarchal society that puts boys first and puts the girls behind us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, this is something that not everybody may realize going through life, right? And it takes folks to build a community, and it takes folks to put that forward and say, hey, like, you have to realize that you being a Hmong boy in the first place gives you so many privileges that your sisters don't have, right? Your Hmong sisters don't have, and I think what you're saying is correct, too. That we do have to acknowledge that first. We have to acknowledge that, hey, we have a lot of privilege, and we need to you know, recognize that privilege before any type of change can take place. It's just like with any type of problem that you have internally, you have to know to acknowledge the problem and not deny the problem before you can actually work at it.
Yeah.
And I can speak to I can speak to, like, you know, just power structures, right? Because if we think about the patriarchal system, there's this like invisible governing body. But what we don't understand is that by virtue of us being men, we are the governing body, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, well, there's always this sentiment of like, oh, well, yeah, it's not my problem. Somebody's going to come and fix it. But realistically, we are the ones to fix it. We have just also been taught that because or then our voice doesn't matter in that regard. But we understand. I think at a baseline level, everybody understands the amount of misogyny and the patriarchy that comes into play. So, like, I'm reminded of it every day because my name is Daniel, and if I can go into this a little bit, I was named Vatu because I have two older sisters. My parents really, really wanted boys. So when I was born, they're like, oh, we're going to name him Vatu because we want Vatu. For those who don't speak Hmong, Vatu means hoping for sons or hoping for boys, right? Because they wanted to have a lot of boys. And I remember growing up and just questions like, why do they call me Vatu? Like, it just seems weird because everybody was like, Gomeng or Genku, like important names, but mine was like Vatura. And so then my parents told me, like, yeah, we wanted a lot of boys. And so from an early age, I've always questioned, like, why are boys more valued? And so just by namesake, I'm reminded of it every day. Like, it's built within that system. We're not, you know, the system doesn't inherently say, like, outright say that, oh, you know, women are not as valuable as men. But, you know, it allows that kind of mindset to exist in this world. So there are, you know, in terms of like changing things, right? We don't need anybody's permission to make this change because we are a communal system where we really show we're an example of democracy at work, right? Whatever customs and traditions have been put in place or are taught to us. It's been taught to us because it was agreed upon by everybody who takes part within that system. So by that notion, we also have the power to change it. So if we don't like this domestic violence, domestic abuse that happens, we have the power to change it. And we as men are in a very important position to be able to make that change, to bring more seats to the table, to have more seats to the table for our women, and also to put a stop to this. Instead of waiting for somebody else, we can be the leaders that we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to touch on what you guys said about like the privilege. And, you know, I think it could be difficult to accept to acknowledge, right? I think one of the barriers to acknowledging it may be like, if I acknowledge it, then I have to accept responsibility for having, contributed to it, right? I think it's that guilt, right? To say, hey, like with privilege comes a guilt of, having caused it. And I think that's, I think that's probably the emotions that, I probably went through as I felt that. It's like, yeah, guilty for doing it and being associated with it. But I think, as you guys have said, those are the emotions that we need to work through to accept this and to kind of bring about the change that Daniel has been kind of pointing to.
So like with that, like we do live in a patriarchal society for our Hmong community, and with that, like Hmong men do have more privileges, and when we see domestic violence and we are silent, that makes us complicit. But at the same time, we're also benefiting from it as men, So how can we speak out, or how can we not stay silent? What do we need to do to address this?
Yeah, and I think that like we got a great question here that kind of ties right into that too. Like, Aya told us there, it's really easy to put the burden on women to prevent domestic abuse, but how many men have seen or heard a cousin or friend, someone that that you did not say anything to stop the violence, or at least show that you didn't agree with what's going on for fear of getting into other people's business, right? I'll speak on that like from a personnel standpoint. That's happened to me, right? I've seen things that I know that shouldn't be happening, and initially I didn't say anything, right? Because it's kind of like, well, it's not my business, it's their issue. You don't get into other people's businesses, right? But it didn't sit well with me after that, right? To say, hey, like these are peers who I could have said something to where they could have maybe taken it differently. And it doesn't, for me on that journey, it wasn't something that like switched overnight. So the next time I saw something, I said something, right? It's just kind of like, hey, that's not cool, right? And then it became an evolution up to the point where it's more so like I've gotten to the point comfortable enough in some specific relationships to just say, hey, like that, like that's not right. We got to be treating them better or women better and saying differently to them. So I think exactly what you said here is right. Of this when we remain silent, we basically enable it and we're complicit to it. So what are your thoughts on how do we go about bringing or speaking up and bring some kind of visibility and light to it?
I think I think it's a thank you, Aya, for that comment. The whole idea of not getting into anybody else's business or is very dangerous, right? Because who does that protect? Who does that protect? Whenever we say it's they're talking about like we shouldn't get involved in their affairs, but I've been facing this comment a lot within the past week, and my response to them has always been: when you see a house that's on fire, you're not asking who started the fire or why is the fire there. The most important thing is to get the people out of the dangerous situation. I'm not interested in assigning blame or figuring out like, oh, who's at fault for what. I got to make sure people are safe, right? Whether it's a man beating a woman or a woman beating a man, because it's domestic violence and domestic abuse against men is also a very real thing. I don't care. I just want to make sure people are safe, right? Because I'm not going to take it upon myself to be the mediator. Because it's when it comes to like resolving the disputes, that's not like I haven't been given the permission from these two parties to do so. Right. If they need an advocate, if they need somebody to step in to separate apart, I will gladly do so. But that's my first thing. And it intrigues me that people bring up that argument, but will allow this incident of violence or abuse to still happen. Because you're like, oh, what if I support the wrong side? I'm like, well, what if you saved a life by stepping in? Isn't that what's more important? So the Chiapetemeng, that it never made sense to me because I'm stopping the fight. That's it. I don't know who's at fault. I'm not making any judgments. I just wanted to stop.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring this comment up with right here. It's that like women are not brought to ruffle the feathers as small men, but like we have to do what we do because women don't always have a seat at the table. So kind of what you just said there, Daniel, like, as we think about it happening, like a lot of times the women don't feel like they're in a position to kind of, prevent it themselves. Right. I think, as terrible as it sounds, your voice can have power, what you said before, in terms of, the influence you might have on your peers. Just as simply a reminder that something's not correct or right, can be more impactful to that person than their spouse telling them like, this isn't right what you're doing to me. Right. So I think, kind of back to your point, like our voice does have the power. Unfortunately, sometimes more so than what the women's will have.
Yeah, Ming, I think what you're saying is correct. Unfortunately, there's just other Hmong men that won't listen to anyone else except another Hmong man, and so we have to be comfortable we have to be uncomfortable. We have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and being able to put ourselves out there to stop a situation, something like this, if we see it. Even if it doesn't have to be physical abuse, it can be emotional, psychological abuse. If you see it, if you hear it, if that's your friend, you really should pull him to the side and be like, hey man, like what you just said or did to your partner is probably not the most healthiest things, and just do anything to intervene in that situation, right? And going back to the having a spot at the table, it's a big issue. It's a big issue because we have a lot of folks with power that don't want to hear the other side. They like the control of their powers. They don't like to give it up. So then they keep the suppression of our Hmong sisters down, and you see it everywhere. You see that. I mean, you take a look at any Facebook posts out there. Anytime Hmong sisters trying to make a correction, or she's trying to bring justice forward or something, there's always someone out there, usually a Hmong guy, right? Always out there trying to bring her down, being in her way of making progress. And so, it's heartbreaking that, we all can't be supporting our Hmong sisters. And we do have to be the ones to step forward to allow them that spot on the table. We have to voice that so that other Hmong men that aren't hearing them can hear us to put them on the forefront.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys this, right? Like, I think this is one of the struggles. Like, I don't think anyone disagrees that we need to speak out. Like that's one action for change. I think where it becomes difficult is how, right? Like, I think about with amongst my peers and my friends, we have relationships, so it's comfortable. But if I'm trying to talk to an older brother, older cousin who's 40s plus, that dynamic, I'm expected to respect that, right? That because of the age difference. And for someone in that position, I mean, you guys have any thoughts on like how do you go about speaking out? Because that that can feel uneasy, uncomfortable, much more uncomfortable than speaking to you guys who might be more in my age group and my peers.
So I did want to say something about that. So the way I see it is, speaking out is hard, regardless if it's a peer, a friend, or a colleague. But it's even harder when it's a elder, or someone in a respected position. But and I'll be honest, like not everyone can be that strong to speak out. But I feel like one of the things that the minimum we should expect from other Hmong men is if someone else does speak out, we all should support him in speaking out. Not everyone can be that person to speak out, but we all can be that support, though.
And I think what the critical part that's missing, interesting. The part that's missing in these conversations is critical thinking, right? Because we have to examine our biases. We have to examine like what we've been taught to be true and challenge those conventions, right? Because this is a very important topic that we're discussing. Everybody knows that domestic violence exists, right? Because we've seen the evidence of it. However, just in my conversations, there have been a lot of different remarks. Some of them being like, "Oh, well, it's an individual issue," or and it's important to understand the different powers at play. There are power structures, there are societal issues, right? Like Meng, you were saying with your divorce from your ex-wife, it's like, how is she going to be treated, right? Even if it's an amicable divorce, even if you two agreed and you guys were still good parents to your kid, people are still going to like you're going to be fine. As a man among society, a divorced man, it's fine. But the woman, she now gets a scarlet letter of Pandora, and so that's what we also have to take a look at. So it's not just like, stopping domestic abuse and domestic violence is not the only thing we have to do. We have to tear down all the misogyny within our community and look at all the rules and societal norms that allow this kind of behavior to exist. It's scary. It's scary. And what I have been continually telling people now is there's this quote I heard, I can't remember from who it was, but it says that we blame society, but we are society. And so to bring it to a more of a context for the Hmong community, is like, "Bé liệt cho lò đó, bé liệt cho lò đấy, ô là xã mà là xã chỉ thông là chỉ tao tao để bé ô nên nhỏ là chả tới cho mình cả nó đó." But what we need to understand is lần hữu bé yêu cho lò, bé yêu cho nó cho, or we're going to be the ones passing down these traditions. So we need to take a stand now to understand what is not okay. Take a stand and normalize that discussion, right? Because it's a very nuanced discussion of like, oh, well, like how do you respond to, how do you as a man respond to criticism from a woman versus how do you respond to criticism from a man? Because I'll tell you, this past week, I've been commenting on a lot of stuff on Facebook, and I know I probably shouldn't for the sake of my own mental health, but I'm going to do it anyway because women have it a lot tougher than I do. So I will weaponize my privilege. But I will try to call out men who are saying very toxic stuff. They usually don't respond to me, but they'll still continue to pick a fight with women. I'm like, guys, this is the patriarchy. This is misogyny in action. You need to understand it. And the only reason why I continue to speak is not for those men, because I think generally they would have made their decision already, and they've made a decision to not be open to having a conversation with me. But it's for everybody else who's on the sideline, who's watching and observing, be like, I see all this problem, but why aren't men stepping up? And so we have to call out, we have to normalize this. We have to be able to let men express their emotions, because there's this thing where with Hmong men where you stole shit though, but we're also victims of the patriarchy.
Yep.
This patriarchy damages us as well. So where we can't even express ourselves, and we have to challenge it. We have to challenge it because it is our culture, and we are going to be the ones who decide what is okay and what is not.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Daniel, that just like what you were saying, you see it in the comments, when another Hmong man steps in to say something, the dynamics of that exchange changes. And whether or not the other person realizes it, that's a lot of issues like sexism in our community, misogyny in our community, where they've already put a woman lower than them, so that when there's a conversation that's being struck between them and a woman, they don't even realize that they see themselves above the woman. And it takes another man to step in and say, hey, yo, like what you're doing is wrong, right? What you're saying is wrong. And then when another man steps in, it just seems like the dynamics change in their mind, right? Subconsciously it changes. And that's a true power struggle there, and that's an issue that I do see a lot too, Daniel. So that's a good point for bringing that up. And what you're saying about allowing our men to express themselves, I think that is one of the biggest issues, because some folks don't know how to express themselves in a very healthy way, right? They let this anger or this frustration build up, and then it becomes like a toxic explosion, right? Whereas they're not taught from a younger age to really know how to sort through their emotions and deal with it in a healthy way, right? So that's a big issue.
And I think that's where we can also help too, right? Like it isn't just a focus on domestic abuse. It is creating kind of culture and space for emotionally supporting each other as men, right? I think a lot of times folks who don't have an outlet for support in a healthy way, kind of meet these issues for themselves and aren't able to deal with it. And so, the more that we can support each other to share, I think within our age group, right, the more we can support each other to slowly make that change, to be vulnerable, to be able to kind of share our emotions with each other, the more we'll be able to support each other through that. And then I think, as we think through the next generation, though, like that's also very important how we raise our sons, and in this next generation, to one, be able to express themselves emotionally, kind of, not having, like what you said, not expecting them to just be strong rocks, because what that really does is that it really creates a person to be isolated, really isolated in themselves. They don't feel like they can share. And I think, just men in general. I think because of this, I don't think it's just within Hmong culture, but there's just whole expectations of men and this man box of keeping emotions to themselves, and it leads to really a lot of mental health issues, like in older age, and that just kind of manifests itself sometimes. And so I think we got to really teach our sons to be different, to kind of show them that they can express their emotions, and for us to be able to express our emotions with them, kind of help them create that safe feeling of sharing emotions as they grow up.
I really, the fact that you guys said that Hmong men can't express themselves, that really hits home with me. Like, because when I think about it, Hmong boys were raised in this culture where we're not allowed to express our feelings, but at the same time, we're giving status. Our status is risen to above women or above girls, which causes this dynamic where we expect everyone to understand us when we don't even understand ourselves, and then it causes this issue with like that can lead to domestic violence. And with that, like what Ming was saying, like we need to raise our kids better, where we better. But not only that, but I think we also have to raise them in a way that we don't give them a status above among women in our community as well.
And it's if I can expand on that a little further, it's also in our messaging, right? Because I don't have kids. I don't have kids. I'm not married or anything. But just when your kid is crying, right? Whether it's a boy or a girl, one of the things I hear a lot is, you're telling them not to cry, and you're telling them to not express themselves, right? Because nobody cries just for the heck of it. Just because babies can't speak doesn't mean that they aren't feeling very real feelings. So from an early age, when we say takora, like that, you're already starting to suppress emotions in that regard. And as time passes and we become more educated on like child psychology, we need to really take that into account of like, where did all this come from, right? I haven't, in my life, right, I've never been the one to cry, but then I started just kind of working backwards. I'm like, why is that? Why is that? Because every time I have cried, I've been shamed for it. So now I've been taught, no, this is how you survive. This is how you avoid any shame, is to not do it in the first place. But nobody ever talks about conflict resolution within yourself. I'm like, I'm dealing with these very complex and hurtful emotions, but how do I do that? So there needs to be there's so much that needs to happen, in terms of bettering mental health within Hmong men, Hmong women, and how we raise our kids. But it's not as simple. It's not as simple as people think it may be. When they say, it's a simple thing, she should just leave. There are a lot of things we have to take into consideration. But we also have to get ourselves out of the mindset of finding reasons to not do anything, because it's so easy to find a reason or an excuse to not do anything. But we have to get out of that, because we have to, otherwise nothing changes.
Yeah. And Daniel, I think that's a great, there's this comment here saying that the older starting to die out and the new generation is slowly changing, and nothing has changed overnight. While I agree with the latter, nothing changes overnight, I think going to what you said, this could be I've thought this at times too, right? Very dangerous mindset in terms of like, hey, change will just happen when one generation passes, right? But I don't think we'll probably not see the change we want if we don't start making the small changes today and just expect that the change will occur naturally because of, we're assimilating different values. And so, I think that's a key point there that you mentioned on making sure that we drive the change today instead of expecting it to just happen with the changing of the guard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's I understand this part, because there have been people messaging me. It's like, oh, why are you speaking up about it now? It's like, because for so long I've been waiting for somebody to speak up, but I can't wait forever. I'm not going to wait until long and I'll say, oh, the next generation will take care of it. Oh, the next generation will take care of it, because I'm just passing the buck. It's my responsibility as a patriarch within the society to change it for the better. And we have to do it within these conversations where we have to normalize that. That's all it is, normalizing the conversation, because the patriarchy where it is, I guarantee you it took a long time for that to get put into effect as well. So if it's taken time to get to where it is, it'll also take time to get to where it needs to be. But that's not a reason to not do anything today.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. Change doesn't happen with an older generation passing away. Change, that's never how change works. Change is always brought forward in tough times, in uncomfortable situations. And like Daniel was saying, we just have to normalize it. We have to push it forward and normalize it and move forward with the ones that are willing to move forward with it, and continue to spread the progress.
Yeah, because Yeng, like you're right. Right now, the culture says to not share, right? But once you get enough critical mass behind normalizing this, the folks who think differently will feel probably more pressure and more as that the outcast versus immediately the ones who are driving change right now probably feel a bit nervous and pressure. But once this becomes more normalized and more acceptable, and to Yang's point, like we have to be the ones who start normalizing it. The ones who do see these issues, we can't remain silent. So we start normalizing it, and I guarantee there will be enough critical mass that we've built where we can start shifting this tone across in the culture.
And I do agree that the hardest change to make is within the older generation, but I do believe that they're not a lost cause, because I want to believe that, even amongst those older generation, there are people who are open-minded and are good and want the best for us and our culture. So I don't want people to be thinking, oh, let's wait until a generation passes, then we'll change. No, we should help everyone change for the better.
And I have to acknowledge, right, that it's not easy. It's not simple. It is scary. It's scary, and it takes a lot of courage to be able to speak up against the very system that we have put on this thing. Whether it's religion, whether it's a community, you're speaking up against something. People are going to get their feathers ruffled, and it takes a lot of courage. And I totally get it. Not everybody has the courage to speak up and challenge the status quo, but we can. That's the thing. Courage, courage runs within our blood. If you want an example of courage, look to your parents. For those of us, they escaped a war-torn country as refugees, and they were able to come across the world to the United States or France or Canada, wherever you may be, and they were able to make a life for themselves. That's courage. So courage runs within our blood, and so if they can do that, we can do this.
And I want to build on how to build the courage is we need to reframe it. I think you talked about this earlier, Dan. We need to reframe it from getting into someone else's business to protecting someone, right? And so by doing nothing, what you're doing is you're not protecting someone versus respecting someone else's business. And which one's the greater of both evils, right? And I think if you reframe the way you can think about it, that might give you some more courage in it. And I know it's difficult. As I mentioned before, the first couple of times it's hard, right? It's very hard. It's very uncomfortable to get into someone's business. But with all things, if you start slow, I think you will build your confidence in your ability to do it. You've got to start somewhere, and small steps like that can help you build your confidence and courage in it. I think to a point where you can feel more comfortable doing it. And I think even if you don't think, what I've seen is even if you don't think that someone's actually listening to you or taking something out of it, what I've seen happen is that they know you're watching. Right, they at least know that some other man is watching and judging them, or analyzing what they're doing, whether or not they're changing. And I think that is even more important than just being complicit and silent to it, and basically effectively enabling them without any barriers to the things that they're doing.
Yeah, it's scary. We have to keep doing it, but then also I want to also acknowledge that it's a very real thing when people do fight back against you, because the whole situation with Newly, right? When I made those posts and I was making those updates, there was not all Hmong men. Let me address that. Not all Hmong men is a cop-out answer because you're seeing the problem, but then you're not taking personal responsibility for it. You're not taking personal responsibility. It's oh, don't trash all Hmong men, because not all Hmong men are like that. We're not talking about on an individual level. We're talking on a systemic level. And it's that you have that system to back you up that allows you to make comments like that. So just like with the Black Lives Matter situation, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, with this movement, it's not just one thing. We have to think about the systems in play that allow for this behavior to exist. So when women say not all Hmong men, I'm not going to take offense to it. I'm not going to take offense to it because I know what they're talking about. I know they're not meaning to lump me into it. And also, as an advocate, right, if you're really there to fight for the rights of women and non-binary folks, if you're fighting for anybody, if they happen to accidentally lump you into the oppressors, my ego does not matter.
Yeah.
It does not matter to me, because what matters to me is that you are safe. So I will keep fighting for it. And it's understandable. I get it when some men are like, well, we're trying to help, but pace. And I'm like, I get it. You're also allowed to have your emotions, because those are very real emotions. But we have to recenter ourselves and like, who are we helping?
Mm-hmm.
Who are we helping? We're not doing this so that we can get some kind of clout, so that we can get some kind of recognition or praise from anybody. I don't care. If nobody knows my name when I'm dead, that's fine. But if I have made an impact in other people's lives, even if it's just one, I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, and I'll build it, like, because you said when we start saying not Hmong men, like, we are turning the issue and making it about us, right? We're making it about Hmong men. And that's not the point here. The point here is that the issue is about Hmong women, because I mean, we all acknowledge disproportionately, that happens more to Hmong women. And as you said, like, we as Hmong men, we should not need the validation from other people that we're good Hmong men. If we realize and we understand who we are as a person, and that we are not that build, then you shouldn't need people to validate, and you shouldn't take it personally when people say I'm Hmong men. And then I flip on that in a second. If we realize we're in that position to be there, then we need to acknowledge that we also then have a responsibility then to those Hmong men that applies to help them grow, to bring them out of this. And that's really the direction we need to take it. I think it all just comes to allyship, right? Allyship isn't about us; it's about people. It's about the marginalized group, and in this situation, that marginalized group is winning.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want to build on top of that. Thanks for bringing that topic up, Daniel, about the not Hmong men. Think of it this way. I mean, I think for a lot of folks that write those things in the comment, hey, not all Hmong men are like this, blah blah blah, right? You are taking away from the issue, and I want you to. And if these Hmong men are on right now listening, I hope they are. I want them to think of it this way. What if a white person said to a black person, "We're not all racist"? But then again, it's like, okay, so what are you doing? What are you doing about the racism that's going on? Are you just going to sit there and say, oh, we're not all racist, so I'm good, doesn't affect me, so I'm just going to go over here, right? And it's the same exact concept with when you say these things like, oh, well, not all Hmong men are like this. Well, you're taking away from the fact that, hey, one, a Hmong sister's been abused, right? You're not adding to the conversation. You're not doing anything to improve the livelihood of our sisters. So just like Daniel said, it is a cop-out answer. It's it's not useful. It doesn't do anything except acknowledge something that we all already know, that not all Hmong men are abusive. Yes, that's a known fact. No point in repeating it. That's not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is domestic violence. It's, and the power is not equal. The power between the Hmong men and Hmong women, it's not equal, right? And so when a Hmong sister gets abused, people try to find ways of blaming her to make it, her fault, right? And it comes back to that privilege that we were talking about earlier. And I really hope that the Hmong brothers out there that have continuously said, Hmong men, it's not all Hmong men. I hope they realize that comment doesn't help anything. It doesn't bring change. If you don't want to help, fine. Sit down. Let everyone else that's making progress make that progress, and take a back seat.
Well, going off of that, when you say not all Hmong men, in a way you're ignoring the issue, and in a way you're silencing yourself. And with this, like you were saying, because we are Hmong men, and we do have privileges, when other Hmong men act out in violence, we indirectly benefit from that as well. So we shouldn't just be silent. We should say something. We should support or ally with women.
Yeah, and this idea, right? This when this idea when you say not all Hmong men, you're trying to absolve yourself from this thing, right? It was like, oh man, I heard about this guy that beat this woman. Oh, but not all Hmong men. I was like, I'm talking to you because I'm thinking we can have a conversation about this. But if all you're hearing is that you could potentially be lumped in with this guy, is that an admission? Like, are you telling me something that I need to know about you, right? Because like how fragile is your ego that when I criticize when I criticize a singular person who looks like you're gonna say, oh, you probably think that about me too. No, take that away. Because we're not here to protect your ego. We're here to try to save lives. And if you don't have the courage to step up and protect people, then don't get in the way of those who do. It's as simple as that.
I agree.
You can watch us. You can watch us make progress, and that's fine. And I'm doing the work of trying to reframe the male privilege, right? Because in our community, in our Hmong society, we don't necessarily have privilege. We have power, Hmong power, because we don't need to be a touch to be able to step in and say, yo, no, this ain't cool. We just have, by virtue of us being men, we already hold that much power, right? Because privilege assumes that it's something that can be taken away, but it's not going to be taken away. It's not going to be taken away. Like, you can be uninvited to the table, but you can always sit at another table. And we will always have that virtue of being able to sit at another table. So that's just an example of patriarchy at work. So it's like, it's not just a privilege. So other men who will say, oh, well, I don't have male privilege. No, you have male power. You can sit at any table and nobody will hold that against you. Women and non-binary folks, they don't get that luxury. So we need to really think about that and stop this powerlessness, right? Of like, oh, I can't make a change. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And I guarantee you that when you make the first move, people will notice. There are more of us who want to fight for better rights than we can think. And it's just because the conversation has been, looping back to it, hasn't been normalized. Once we have more conversations like this, you'll start finding allies in the crowd. It's just kind of like when you go into a room full of people, you see a Hmong person, like your Hmong radar pops up. You're just like, hey, Hmong Lasha. And then that'll happen. You'll start congregating. You'll start building these alliances with people and be like, okay, cool. This is what's important to us. This is what needs to happen. Let's do it because it's within our power to do so.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate what Chu had said just earlier about, not everyone would have the courage, right? And the courage to step up to that plate. Courage comes with practice. And it comes with practice, and it comes with small steps moving forward. 1, acknowledging there's a problem. 2, make a decision that you want to do something about that problem. And then 3 is just practicing confronting these issues when you see them, right? And, just reiterating what Chu said earlier, because it's very important. If you aren't at that level yet where you're comfortable to be out there and say something about an issue of domestic violence or something bad going on, then at least be supportive of the person that is going to be stepping forward to say those things, right? Because your support matters too, right? Your support allows progress to continue to flow. So,
Yeah, and I just probably want to close with this. I think overall, my line on this is, if you're at the airport, generally there's this announcement in terms of if you see any unleft luggage or whatever, right? Report to authorities. And I take that just kind of like with this, like if you see something, say something, right? Like if take that first step. I think that's it. The call to action here is, if you see something, you see mistreatment happening, make it an effort to try to say something. And I think it has to start there. It has to start somewhere, and it has to start. There are ways to address this from a tops down approach, changing the culture at a systemic level. There's also ways to change this from a bottoms up approach, from a culture from the bottoms up. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage here is that, men, just everyday men, we have the ability to change, the power to change from a bottoms up. And so I want to thank you guys, Daniel and Yeng for joining us today, and everybody else, our audience, interviewers, for the interaction, for the questions. This is just the beginning of the conversation, right? And I think, as we mentioned, we don't want the conversation to die down. We don't want to have more reminders within our community to bring this front and center. And so hopefully we can continue to have these. And so if anybody in our audience is interested in having a conversation with us, feel free to message us. Specifically, we would love to have a conversation with women on how we men can ally, how they want us to show up. We've talked about it a little bit today on how we can help work with our Hmong brothers, but a conversation also needs to be had with our Hmong sisters on how we can show up for them. And so, we want to do a segment on that as well. And so, Daniel, so if you guys have any last words, feel free, throw it out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is an ongoing conversation. I mean, look, I'm not gonna lie and say that, oh, I got to where I am overnight. It takes time. It takes time to unlearn all this stuff. But there are also advocates who are doing the work day in and day out, right? You think about organizations like Man Forward, Chanbof, or CHAN-BOF, Freedom Inc. There are advocates who are doing the work daily, day in and day out. I don't want people to think that, oh, Daniel's one doing no. These are the real heroes, right? These are the real heroes who are doing the work and pushing the conversation forward. They need our help because they are almost always critically underfunded, right? So they need all the exposure, they need all the funding that they can get. So if you can support it, plus most of them are tax deductible organizations, so it helps your pocketbook in the end. So why not?
Yep. I just wanted to thank everybody that came on today and all the audience that's joined us. I wish it could be solved today, and I'd be lying if I said we've started the conversation, and I'd be lying if we say that we solved it today. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done, and a lot of work that we need the community to pull together to get through this. There's been too many deaths in our community from domestic violence. Sometimes it could have just taken one person to stop it, And so I want to thank you guys for being here. I hope that everyone can walk away tonight with just maybe a question to themselves, like who do you want to be for the women in your life, right? Your mom, your grandmother, your aunts, your sisters, your future daughters, your daughters, right? The future generation of Hmong sisters. How do you want their life to be today moving forward, right? And it doesn't get better if we just sit here and say not all Hmong men. It doesn't get better if even though we are good men and we do nothing, it doesn't do any good either, because silence only allows the abuser to continue to do the things that they do. Silence only allows the person in power to continue to do the abusive things that they do, right? In this particular case, domestic violence, right? So, thanks for the platform today, guys, and maybe we can do something more moving forward. Maybe another a webinar like this, and we can have more conversations going forward.
Yep. So, yep. So let's, guys, Hmong men, let's kind of hold ourselves and each other accountable. Continue to grow. Let's continue to push this in our community. That's really the only way that we're going to see this progress. And so, thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks Yeng and Daniel again for hopping on with us.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Thanks all.
Bye, guys.